Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I rise to support the legislation that is before this honorable chamber. I find it eminently consequential, and I think that sometimes, sir, we come to this place and we appear to be going through, we might appear to be going through certain motions, and I think that it is also a part of our responsibility and engagement and communication to make sure that people understand the transformational nature of some of what we come to this place to do. The honourable member who piloted this bill surely demonstrated that he understands the consequence, that he understands the contribution that this legislation makes to the development of this country. But both he and the member for Christchurch East Central, who spoke after him, also flagged for us certain other factors in which this legislation must be couched if it is to be as consequential as it has the potential to be. Before I get to some of those other factors, sir, and I trust that you will be as generous with me, making sure all of my points are made this morning as you have formerly been. But, sir, before I get to those other parts of the whole, I do think it is important as we bring this bill that deals with what we frame as terrace units, so certainly what the initial Act of 2013 and the current bill make reference to, what we might call housing units or housing estates, that we also have to make clear, and I put this question to the Honourable Member for St. Michael West in his wrap-up, to clarify the status of other housing units, of other housing estates. There is an extent to which many Barbadians have been given the impression that as long as they occupy a Ministry of Housing, an NHC housing unit, that they are eligible for these arrangements. I think it has to be clarified, the conditions, the terms and conditions under which each estate or each unit operates, for the avoidance of doubt and so that people can make the appropriate investments in how they wish to live. But I will say that from where I sit as a representative for St. Michael South Central, there are many times people come to me and say, I am under the impression, I was given the impression that I am eligible for rent-to-own arrangements. At a certain time, this will be conveyed to me, and if that is not the case for certain of the estates, then it is important that that be clarified. Equally, sir, this process that relates to housing units is part of a whole. And so the transfer of title as well under the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act of former plantation holdings in what I like to call urban villages. Sometimes we believe that villages are only in the countryside. I grew up in what I call an urban village. I grew up in St. Michael, in Haggett Hall, Carrington Village, Bannister Land, Delamere Land. This is village life. This is former plantation land. And we all know the circumstances under which these Barbadians came to be here on this land. But as this process proceeds, those people in Carrington Village, in Bannister Land, in Britton's Hill, and other places that also qualify for their lands to be transferred also wish, under the Rural and Urban Development Commission, to continue to be updated on the status of those conveyances. And I do, in my capacity, the only capacity the principal capacity that matters to me as the representative of St. Michael's South Central, I do have to advocate for, even though it may not be an effort of the Ministry of Housing, this is one government, this is certainly one cabinet, and it is important that no single process overtake the other, because those individuals also have a right to understand what is happening with those conveyances. I am told from time to time that as the representative, one should be in a position to make the necessary authority, the relevant authority, aware of those who qualify, and I'm happy to do that. I think that we, as a Barbados Labour Party government, are continuing the commitment that we've made, the covenant that we have made with the people of Barbados, certainly in comparison to the Democratic Labour Party when they had the opportunity so to do, and who conveyed very little or nothing. We are certainly holding to that covenant. And I think it is important to be able to continue to give clarity to that process. But sir, there are also certain parts of this whole that I feel it is important to be able to speak to as minister with some responsibility for planning and development in Barbados. The truth is, as we are seeing more and more, it is no longer possible to separate the question of housing from the question of lands, from the question of planning, from the question of traffic. That is no longer possible. I'm not sure that it ever was. And so one of the things that we have certainly satisfied ourselves in the Planning and Development Department is that the forward planning function of the department has to do more heavy lifting. And I know that if those in the forward planning section of the department are hearing me now, they are saying, give me some resources. And they are correct. And they are correct because forward planning is planning. Let me tell you what I mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The practice of waiting for an application, receiving an application, and having this case-by-case approach to considering and approving applications, perhaps in a country of our size, with all of the competing demands on land, on space, perhaps that does not work well. What we have realized is that there is a need to, certainly for key areas like Waterford. There's some in here that call it all kinds of fancy things, but I'm going to stick with the name that's on the map. Waterford, the area where now we have a geriatric hospital, a new geriatric hospital, where the botanical gardens are expanding, where there's all kinds of new development that is taking place. It means that we cannot leave to chance any other kinds of development that might come up. There are going to be demands of the area that relate to water, that relate to traffic, that relate to sanitation, that mean that we have to determine that this area is a key development area. A key development area that must attract the attention of the officers, of the experts in forward planning to say, okay, rather than sit and wait for this thing to hit us like a train, let us see how we plan what will come. That is true for the Waterford area. That is particularly true for the QEH expansion. Now, let me say, for the avoidance of doubt, as I stand on my feet here on the 31st of March 2026 in this honorable place, that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is part of a community. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital is part of a community. And right opposite sits the wonderful community of Campaign Land, Bannister Land, Delamere Land. The QEH expansion now proposes to go over to the Enmore side and build out some key infrastructure there to improve accessibility of services to the people of the country and to be able to solve some of the challenges of the provision of health care that Barbadians have been telling us need to be solved. But the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is part of a community. The people in those communities expect to have opportunities at work, at business development, and at other parts of the engagement of that project and of what it wants to achieve. But further to that, as you go through Bannister, Delamere, Campaign Land, up into Belleville, you are now talking about a medical campus. And the member for Christchurch West knows well what I mean. And so we have always said that, and we know that the healthcare model is a public-private healthcare model. And there is much work to be done, certainly when it comes to healthcare financing, to make that a reality. Because it can't be a public-private healthcare model just because there's a public facility and they're private providers. It has to be that we unify those two players. Remember Christchurch West has particularly strong feelings about this, and I thank him for them. But that if we are expanding into Enmore, we are expanding through the community and bringing the community along into Belleville and even up into Colamarock. This is a medical or a healthcare campus. And it means that there's certain planning that has to be done for that purpose. There is a role for forward planning in determining what is the carrying capacity for the things that we're doing, and how are we able to build out that carrying capacity, even when it comes to certain investments in the tourism sector. We see what is going on in the north of the island, the west coast into the north of the island. And we know that we are going to have to ensure that areas like water and sanitation and other services that are required to support that are in place if this is truly a sector that we want to see continue to grow. The same is true, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, for how we treat housing units, terrace units, housing estates in Barbados. We have the notion sometimes, I know that none of us in this honorable place suffers from that, but we sometimes have the notion that the private sector looks a certain way. The private sector is anybody who is in private business, who is in entrepreneurship. And it means that there may be certain expectations that people have for the ways in which they can build out their homes to also support their business. One of the things that we know, sir, for a fact, is that in circumstances where women who are also caregivers, providers of care in households, the extent to which they are able to work, in some cases, closer to their homes, means that they can at once participate in the formal economy and participate in the household economy, which they are doing anyway. And I say household economy because it is an economic space. It is productive. So we understand that sometimes people will want to be able to work and live in the same space. But When we talk about rights and opportunities, we must talk about responsibilities. The notion that we do not have to have ordered development because there's a segment of the population that cannot sustain the expectation of order is a fallacy. And it does no justice to working class communities in this country. I'm going to repeat myself. The notion that working class communities should not and cannot live and work and carry out business in an ordered way, or should not be expected to, is a judgment in itself. So this notion that, well, we are not going to have any expectations of certain people in this country does no favors to us or to them. I wholly accept the point made by the member for Christchurch East Central in his intervention, that we have to be able to give predictability to people living in these units. I recall a conversation when I was first Minister with responsibility for planning that had to do with providing expansion guidelines, if to the extent that they are permissible, to the extent that expansion is permissible under these agreements, that we give expansion guidelines directly to those tenants, so that whatever, as the member said, might be the permitted development, if there is some permitted development, whatever that permitted development is, that we communicate that in advance, or we communicate that as part of the conveyancing, but that we do seek to bring order and to maintain order, because guess what? It is that order that benefits people's well-being. It is that order that helps them live in more productive and useful ways. And so I reject the notion, and I've said it in this honorable place before, that working class communities cannot be subject to that kind of order, because that is another kind of marginalization in which I will have no part. And to that point, there's another piece of work that the Planning and Development Department is working on, which is forward planning for vending zones, or forward planning to support the vending policy. The member for St. James Central and I have had some conversations on this, and I gather that I won't preempt anything that he may wish to say, but I gather that he is in agreement that just like with any other legislation, just like with this legislation, the vending policy has to be supported by the other parts of what we do. And so there also has to be some predictability in those vending zones, how they operate, but also to give people an opportunity, if their home environment does not support the kind of activity that they want to do, like a mechanic or a car wash. If their home does not support that, then the vending zones, which we are erecting in each community, so you not even have to pay any bus fare. You may be able to walk across the road, but the point is that you are doing it in the designated area for that activity. We started that with previous ministers of industry. I was able to expand it when I was minister responsible for industry. The member for St. Michael North, I believe, initiated the activity through Export Barbados for those mechanic bays, so that people who want to be involved in that industry can do it in the appropriate way. Sir, this is important for a number of reasons. And I think we have to have some conversations with ourselves in the mirror. The member for St. Michael South has been hitting the road to hear from Barbadians about traffic management. As we began this new term, that was the conversation on everyone's lips. Has certainly been a part of the productivity conversation in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and it is a part of the conversation that the member, as Senior Minister for Infrastructure, has to contend with and is beginning to do so, and to hear from Barbadians. And let me say that I don't think that the traffic management conversations were ever intended to be a conversation about flyovers. It's a conversation about traffic management writ large. So let us disabuse ourselves of the notion that this is a flyover conversation. It was never that. That was always a potential solution. But we all know that there are several solutions that are involved. But those efforts relate to these efforts as well. So the same area that I'm talking about us doing as a key development area, we talked about Waterford as one, but another key development area related to the QEH expansion is that QEH, Bannisterland, Belleville area. But let me tell you something, sir, that is happening in that area. Everybody knows that one of the bottlenecks coming from Carrington Village, Belmont Road, up into Colomorock is Pine Road. One of these days, we're going to be able to have visual aids in here so that they can have a pointer and show what I mean. But Pine Road is gridlock at certain times of the day. Many other places in Barbados too. But one of the recent sources of that gridlock has been one or two new businesses, small businesses, informal businesses that have established, and people are pausing to be able to patronize the establishment. Now, I support with every fiber of my being the right of those individuals to start a business. That is what we want. That is what we want to see. What we also want is to be able to be given the opportunity to give the appropriate guidance to individuals for where is the best place and under what conditions that they can carry out their business. One of the reasons that the Planning and Development Department has to oversee these kinds of things is that sometimes when you put a business in a particular location, traffic has to stop there. And when traffic stops there, it may create a hazard, it may create a danger to pedestrians and to other motorists, it may create a gridlock. And as much as other Barbadians want you to succeed, they also want to get to work on time. They also want to get to pick up their children on time before the school gate closes. And so let us help each other. If there's one appeal that I make, it is let us help each other have the level of well-being and live the kinds of lives that we want. So, forward planning, sir, for permitted development for estates, that is on our list. Planning policy for vending zones and vending, that is on our list. Being able to understand the traffic, sanitation, water needs for each of these key development areas, that is on our list. And it will necessitate, I am pretty sure, further amendments to the Planning and Development Act, on which we are working now, to be able to facilitate all of this. But sir, perhaps the final thing I will say in this regard is this. And before I move on to that, I do have to say that in relation to the permitted development in any units, to the extent that there is meant to be such, and certainly the member for St. Michael West and I will have those conversations with our teams. But I think that there's also a pathway here to be able to have a particular track for these kinds of efforts. Let me tell you what I mean. The Planning and Development Department in 2019, when we brought the new legislation, we set ourselves some timelines. Timelines for planning applications that involve an environmental impact assessment, timelines for other kinds of major applications, but also timelines for simple residential applications. In general, the Planning and Development Department finds that it is meeting the timelines for residential, simple homes or simple home expansions. I say that because I want to give people the assurance that if you do need to make an application for some kind of expansion to your home or some kind of new build for simple residential, that it is likely to go according to the short timeline that we have established. But further to that, if we are able to give some predictability and be able to get some of these things more quickly and easily through the system, we can't just facilitate fast tracking for major developments. The private sector is the private sector. We are here to serve all Barbadians. And so we have to look at whether there's a possibility that we have a special track for regularizing these kinds of investments. Finally, sir, I am loath to disagree with my very good friend from St. Michael West. And I don't really think it's a disagreement. I think it is perhaps a variation in perspective. But I do think that the idea that that there is no place for rent, that idea perhaps does not allow us to completely modernize our approach to accommodation. Ownership matters. Ownership matters, and that is the point of this economic enfranchisement mandate of this government. I think that just as we are looking at all kinds of solutions for traffic and movement and infrastructure and all of those things, we have to be able to accommodate all kinds of solutions for housing and accommodation, and to realize that there are also many kinds of ownership. We have been saying that when we talk about establishing a junior stock exchange or being able to create vehicles in which Barbadians can invest, because even though I may be paying rent, I may at the same time be able to have other kinds of productive investments that are earning me a dividend, and that will mean that my family still has something that they can take up when I am gone. Now, they may choose to buy a home with what I am able to leave for them. That is their choice. But let us understand that the rental market is a market. It is a legitimate market. And there is a time in our lives where some of us may decide rental works for me now, and home ownership may not work for me now. Home ownership may work for me later, or a different kind of instrument, a different kind of financial investment may work for me now. So I support entirely the ownership mandate of the Ministry of Housing and of this government. Ownership of something matters. Ownership of boss bonds, ownership of investment in some kind of special purpose vehicle, investment in some kind of hotel project. That matters. I do think that we have to be able to get frank with ourselves about what is the kind of accommodation mix, rental and ownership and lease and others, that works for our economy. Now, the final point I will make before I take my seat is that that also means that we have to concern ourselves with the condition of rental properties that are put on the market. Because I will tell you, from where I sit in St. Michael South Central, some of these rental spaces, you have no right asking somebody for money for the condition in which I see some of these places. And we have to be able to bring the two things together. We have to be able to make sure that owners, landlords have rights while they also demonstrate some responsibility to keep the property in good working order. You're a tenant, you got to keep the people's place good. You're a landlord, you got to keep the place in good order so that people can live dignified lives. So, sir, I wholly support this legislation. I think that it helps, as all good legislation does, as all good policy does, it helps trigger for us some of the other ways in which we need to step up to meet the member for St. Michael West in his very progressive agenda. We are inspired by it, and we make the commitment so to do. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm obliged to you.